Healing and Reconciliation. I've been leading annual healing and reconciliation journeys back to Vietnam. This is not only for our Vietnam veterans. I've taken their survivors, their orphans, their widows, family members who travel in proxy for their loved ones because they're too elderly or disabled. Some veterans from the sandbox wars have come to Vietnam because they can't go back to Iraq or Afghanistan, but they want to be in reconciliation with former foes. And lots of civilians who are on spiritual journeys or people who are activists against the war and still have their business with Vietnam and want deep relations with them. So I will talk about that in a few minutes. But before that, I want to say some introductory words about this concept of moral injury that we're all working with, talking about, and struggling with together. And I want to affirm how old both of these invisible wounds, what we call post-traumatic stress disorder today and what we call moral injury today, have been known since ancient times. They are in the most ancient literature, mythology, and testimony of war we have. Moral injury and PTSD is in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the very first poem that we have in any language, and it's not accidental that the very first epic in human history is a profound war story showing these wounds, this suffering. So we've known about these since ancient times, and I just want to say a few introductory words about that to affirm that what we are working with is archetypal, is eternal, and is of utmost importance, not just for our times, each other, and our country, but for world well-being. So probably most of us know this first quote, the first casualty of war is truth. I think we use that a lot. Many of us use that. I don't know if we all know that it comes from ancient Greece. Aeschylus, the Greek tragic playwright, the one who invented tragedy, first said that. And most people don't know, but he was a combat veteran. He was at Marathon and at other major battles, and he knows what he was talking about from that time till now, when when we need to testify to the truth of war and we can't because of the politics of the time. So we need to recognize that we all know this in Veterans for Peace, but whenever the truth is suppressed or denied or distorted, that itself is moral injury. If we can't rely on the truth, then we've got nothing to stand on. And so we are in profound trouble today when half the country or more challenges what is true and says there aren't even any facts anymore. So the first casualty of war is truth, and when truth is distorted, it's moral injury. From ancient times as well, stay in ancient Greece for a few moments. We all know of Socrates, of course, and we all, probably most of us know Socrates was the one who first introduced the word and the concept of the soul in Western civilization. And everything we have of philosophy and psychology evolves from that. I don't know how many people know this, but Socrates also was a combat veteran. In fact, he never left Athens his entire life, except when he was on combat deployment to defend Athens during the Peloponnesian Wars against Sparta. Socrates taught, partly from what he learned from combat, Socrates taught that the soul is that in us which improves and deepens and enlarges from doing good and telling the truth, and is wounded and shrinks and can get lost when we lie or when we do wrong. So Socrates' basic philosophical lesson is we have souls and we must do right, or we are harming our own spiritual cores as well as our society and other people. So that lesson also comes from ancient times, from a combat veteran. And a third ancient combat veteran, I'm going to quote, I'm flipping from the Greek tradition to the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Bible. The Bible is also full of moral injury. It reeks with moral injury, actually, when we read it carefully. The Bible is full of so many wars and abuse and horror, and all of the wounds that we know of and we struggle with PTSD that come after war are everywhere in the Bible. with families turning against each other, killing each other, incest, substance abuse, betrayals. It's everywhere. The first in all of our traditions, the Judeo-Christian tradition, the first two warrior kings of ancient Israel and Judea, Saul and David, were both severely traumatized warrior kings. And if we read their stories in the Bible carefully, their PTSD and moral injury is obvious. And David over and over and over again actually prayed to be relieved of his PTSD. The Psalms are poems of PTSD and moral injury. And he talked about them in the Psalms. So I won't go into detail, but one example is from Psalm 7, where David says, if I have for any wrong reason without justification harmed an enemy, then let me be slain in the dust and let my enemy thrive. He was praying with his whole being to not use violence for the wrong reasons, to not harm or kill somebody who hadn't attacked or harmed or killed him. Now we know David did that and he had terrible moral injury, but at least he was aware of the concept and trying to warn the troops of those eras about it. So Garrett and I agreed we're just going to speak for about 10 or 15 minutes each, and then we're going to have open discussion. So forgive me for talking quickly, but I want to jump into one more quote from our elders. I also study and work with the Native American tradition and work on our reservations with Native American warriors. And I just want to quote Sitting Bull, another great American warrior whom we've all heard of, and we know Sitting Bull did take many lives in battle. Two things about Sitting Bull. He said the most important thing he ever did was to be not a chief and not a warrior, but the medicine chief of the Hunkpapa warriors, which meant he was responsible for their spiritual healing. They did have traumatic wounding sometimes. They did experience what we call PTSD and moral injury. They had different names and different concepts for it, and they had massive, complex rituals for healing it. And they knew of the damage. So Sitting Bull himself said that anytime we take a life, we are wrong, because he said, nobody, no matter what the justification, nobody has the right to take life. Our job is to preserve and to protect, not to offend, not to harm, not to take life, even when we do it for utterly for a defensive reason. We are still morally injured, and because we're still taking life when we're supposed to be preservers and protectors. So all these three traditions, the Greek, the Native American, and the Judeo-Christian, all know of these wounds, affirm them, and had profound wisdom for how to address them. So I'm going to jump quickly into our modern times, into some of my work. As we shared briefly, I've been leading healing and reconciliation journeys to Vietnam since 2000. We do have the only Veterans for Peace chapter outside the United States is in Vietnam. And so we have a chapter there. It's housed in Da Nang. I forget how many members there, but they're active. And when I go to Vietnam, we meet together there as well. I wish we had an hour to talk about this, maybe another time, but I want to share with you that in spite, and some of us are Vietnam veterans, I see that. Welcome to all of you brothers and sisters, and some of us are younger, but these lessons are important for all of us. Two things I want to share from Vietnam. I have researched this all over the country extensively, and it's hard to believe unless we go there and really encounter this, but there is no chronic wartime post-traumatic stress disorder in Vietnam such as we have here. It's not there. We think and there's no moral injury, even from the Arvins, the people who fought on our side, for quite a number of reasons, and that would be a whole different presentation. But suffice it to say for now that in Vietnam, they have the religious, the sacred, the historical, the ritualistic, the communal practices for working together with each other to resolve, to give people everything they need after military service and combat, and then resolve these terrible injuries. So the Vietnamese report that people did have these injuries immediately after the war and for several months, but they've all disappeared because they've really given their people everything they need for recovery. So we can talk about that at length later, but I want to share just two stories of healing moral injury from Vietnam, and both are presented in my book. So I'll try to do this quickly, and then we can listen to our brother Garrett. I'm going to read a poem called Praying. There's two stanzas. This is in the voice of a Vietnam vet from Massachusetts who went back to Vietnam with me. The first stanza was when on his 19th birthday, when he survived a monstrous battle and a suicide charge. And he and his unit, they took heavy casualties. They killed 300 enemy warriors, and they dug a mass grave and buried them all. It haunted him for over 40 years until we went back to Vietnam to return the grave to the Vietnamese people. So the first stanza is during the battle, when he's praying to live. And the second stanza is when we went back a few years ago and we returned this grave to the Vietnamese. You will hear his transformation from taking the moral injury during the battle to healing it on return. Never in my life did I pray so hard as that day at the smoking bottom of this mountain, among giant boulders and fallen trees, when the enemy overran our wire and sprouted like berserk rice stalks no farther away than the length of my rifle, and our muzzle holes became God's wrathful eyes. Never in my life did I pray so hard until today, on the cloud-crowned top of this mountain, among smiling statues and wafting incense, when their children took my hands and called me uncle, and their monks bowed to me as if I were a saint, and I embraced their dead as my true brothers, and God's loving eyes gazed through my torn and mending heart. So I'd like to just share with you that since that trip to Vietnam with Al, when he had this experience, the Vietnamese really did treat him like a saint. He thought they might arrest him, but instead they put their babies in his hands. He didn't feel worthy of holding their babies. They made him hold the babies until he cried and felt comfortable and accepted their love and forgiveness. And since then, he's been back to Vietnam 3 times. He fell in love with a Vietnamese woman, has married her. Now he lives in both countries, and he helps support that family as well as doing charity work in Vietnam. So he's washed clean of his PTSD and moral injury from this reconciliation by going back, returning the grave, and reconciling with the Vietnamese people. And this is not the only time this has happened, but I want to share with you that as a result of this, this really can resolve PTSD. He and others who have done acts like this reported that their nightmares and their flashbacks stopped once they morally reconciled with the Vietnamese, once they gave back what belonged to the Vietnamese, once they gave back war souvenirs. The Vietnamese teach that the souls of the dead cling to their objects until they're returned home. So we might or might not believe that literally, but at least metaphorically, it's true, it happens. This veteran and others were tortured by nightmares and other symptoms. And when they went back to Vietnam, or they didn't want to go back, but they gave me things to return for them. Then when I got back stateside, they said, "What did you do for me in Vietnam? My nightmares have stopped." So I won't read the second poem now. I'll save that for a story later on because we want everybody to have time. But these are my brief introductory remarks on this extraordinarily important topic of moral injury. And I'll just finish by saying some people separate PTSD and moral injury. Thank you, Peter. And I don't separate it. I affirm that moral injury is in the core of PTSD. I translate PTSD, alternative translations, post-traumatic soul distress. The soul is screaming its pain, and when the country doesn't listen, that pain turns into symptoms. and the symptoms are trying to communicate to us. So post-traumatic soul distress and post-traumatic social disorder, because the moral injury belongs to the nation, but we who acted in the name of the nation are carrying it for the entire country until the country finally agrees to carry it together and take responsibility for all of these decisions and actions. So with that, I will pass it over to Garett for your words of guidance and wisdom.
Thank you, Ed. Always a mentor, and love your reading. It really helped me when I first came home to get introduced to your books, and it really put me down the right path, I think. Nate said, I'm Garett Reppenhagen. A lot of you know me as the executive director of Veterans for Peace. I was a U.S. Army sniper and a cavalry scout. It took me a while to realize that I had moral injury. I couldn't even identify what it was. But I can identify the time that it really started. I'd been in Iraq for a little while. I've been in multiple engagements, a lot of ambushes, vehicle mounted. We were ambushed a lot. Oftentimes I was manning the crew served weapon. So on the top of a Humvee with a 50 caliber machine gun or Mark 19 fully automated belt fed grenade launcher, or a 240 Bravo, which is kind of like the new M60, I guess, if you will. We would get ambushed a lot of times at night. Very rarely did we see the enemy. We saw muzzle flashes and shot back. But when you're using weapons like 50 caliber machine guns with the rounds the size of salt shakers, you tear some things up. And when you have multiple vehicles with multiple crew serve weapons firing, when it's all over and you finally get the ceasefire, and you're picking through the wreckage of what had happened, it's really difficult to identify if you killed anybody or somebody else killed anybody. But they were dead people, and none of them could I ever truly attribute to like my kills. We were just reacting. And it even was after probably almost 24 sniper missions before I took a life that I knew it was me. And I had a very strange reaction when it happened. And I went on these 24 sniper missions. Very rarely did I ever pull a trigger on a sniper mission. It was mostly, sitting in a ditch somewhere, watching some highway, sending in, reports to the talk, and, doing recon. And, I wasn't an assassin. A lot of the sniper missions we went on were fairly boring. Until this one sniper mission, we were going on a infiltration and infill to a village that was going to get raided, and we were supposed to set up sniper team positions and observe. And again, we were actually supposed to do mostly reconnaissance because we were waiting for this high target person to enter the village, and then they were going to basically, with a battalion-sized element, lock the town down and raid the houses and get this guy. So we were actually trying to get in there way before. It was probably well before 24 hours before the battalion was preparing to muster and get in there, and we were going to set up shop. And we were crossing this canal, and the canals in Iraq could be little ditches of water, earth ditches, or they could be massive concrete infrastructure, with pretty deep. You'd need bridges to cross. And we knew there was this one point that had a pipe that crossed this bridge that had a wire as a handrail on one side. And we were going to cross there and go sneak into the back of this village and set up shop on this hill where there's an orchard. And we were about halfway across, and there were four snipers, there were four of us. I was in the rear with the radio, and we got attacked from the other side. And we were already about little over halfway, which means I wasn't halfway, but the lead person was over halfway. And when you react to an ambush, you fight through it. That's how you survive an ambush. So we knew we couldn't just turn around and go back. We fought forward, and we took this little piece of dirt that was either, it was a foundation of a building that was either getting built or had been destroyed. I couldn't ever really tell which, but the foundation was still there. And we set up positions, and I was in the rear, and we were basically in a full firefight, except I wasn't shooting. I had a sector to scan, watching our flank and watching our rear. And I was set up. I took my sniper weapon down and was preparing to use that, but realized that my M4 was probably better. And I had my M4 out, and I was waiting and really eager to return fire, but I didn't have any targets. So I just stood my ground and watched. And eventually, sure as shit, here comes this dude kind of popping up. I could see him silhouette himself and pop back down. And he was working his way down a little road. And I didn't know if he was going to just try to run away or what he was doing. But then I realized he was trying to flank us. And he tried to cross the road, and I had a really clear vision of him. And I must have fired 3 or 4 shots. And I watched the first 2 actually skip off the ground and kind of trace out. And the other ones kind of just disappeared into his black silhouette form. And he hit the ground in the middle of the road. And when he dropped, I was filled with this incredible sensation of pride, of success. I was training for so long, for over 3 years, to be here at the spot to do this thing. And here I just did it. It's like you're at the carnival and you never think you're going to hit that damn balloon with the dart, and you do it, and I was just like I just did the thing. And I looked over at the other snipers, and they're still engaged in a firefight. And I'm like, well, no, hey, I just did, you guys check it out. I just did the thing. And they're busy, and I'm like, oh shit, I should be busy too. So I'm looking for other targets. And the dude's not dead. He's still lying in the road, and he's at this point he's arched up onto the up near his neck on his back, and he's spinning around in a circle, just with his legs like boring a hole in the ground or something, just spinning, digging at his chest and his gut. And that feeling, that sensation that I had of success and like pride, washed away from me. And I felt like this one time when I was a kid, I was playing ball in the house, and I knocked this figurine my mom had. We had this German shrunk, set from when we were stationed in Germany, my father. And I hit this porcelain figure, and it fell and broke. And in a panic, I tried to glue it back together and set it up there, and just ashamed of this thing. I wanted to hide it. I didn't want my mom to ever know. That feeling came back all of a sudden. I realized oh shit, I just did a bad thing. And I wanted to glue them back together and put them back on the shelf and pretend none of it ever happened again. And I was trying to I was trying to look for targets, but I couldn't stop looking at this dude. And finally I just unloaded my magazine on him, because I just wanted him to stop. I wanted to disappear him, make him so he didn't even exist anymore in this world. And I couldn't do that. That was within the first couple of months of being in Iraq. And after a course of almost 13 months that I was there, I had many more firefights coming, sniper missions, innocent casualties, just infrared vision is not like it is on the television, in the movies. Many of you know that. It's hard to see figures and what they're doing. And when you think they're planning an improvised explosive device, they might be carrying sticks or taking a piss on the side of the road. I always got brought back to that, even that first person, is that opened that doorway for me. And everything just kind of built upon that. And I'm back, and I do hear what Ed's saying, that there's that there's similarities in the same thing between post-traumatic stress disorder and moral injury. Because I have both. I wake up, I have night terrors, I have intrusive thoughts, flashbacks and triggers, hypervigilance, paranoia, avoidance issues. And a lot of those have been helped through the VA, through mostly alternative medicine, nature therapy. Some of that is alleviated. But they're never gonna manufacture a pill. The VA is never gonna make a pill that stops you from being betrayed by your country. That's gonna make you not be ashamed or guilt-ridden for participating in violence and being a perpetrator of violence of other people. And the moral injury is based off of, and is connected to the PTSD. And when I first got home and I was working in Washington, DC, I was explaining to a friend what I was going through, and they said that they had a friend that worked with inmates who were rapists and murderers in the Maryland penitentiary system, and that she did a thing called PITS, perpetrator-induced trauma syndrome. And she got me connected, and we started talking, and that was the first time that I started talking about forgiveness, personal forgiveness, forgiveness of the people who I harmed and the communities that I harmed. And it was life-changing for me, really, because I was being kicked out of VA peer counseling circles because I was getting too political. But the very cause and nature of the war was what impacted my mental health, and I couldn't talk about it even in the VA. So where did I talk about it? Other than this lady who was doing PITS, I talked about it with Iraq Veterans Against the War and Veterans for Peace. I put it on a giant banner and walked down the street with it and screamed it with comrades that felt the same way I did. And slowly that started to heal me. That started to heal my moral injury because I needed to serve in a real way. I needed something to apply, to help try to change the world for the better, and put myself towards a mission that was of my choosing, and one that was ethical and morally right, and putting good back into the world. Just as Ed visits, Vietnam and brings things from other veterans there to alleviate some of their pain, just to acknowledge what had happened, what you did, your part in it, your nation's part in it, your community's part in it, to acknowledge it, to address it, and to apologize for it is an amazing thing. I'm not a religious person. I'm damn near atheist, agnostic maybe, but there's something about confession, right? Just getting it out there and saying it, and putting words to it, and making it real, and having that acknowledgement, I think, is incredible. And then, the penance and the atonement is very massive too. And I was at a point where I honestly did not allow myself happiness. I did not let myself be happy. I didn't deserve it. I came home and I was getting free beers at bars, and, people congratulating me and thanking me. And I didn't get a parade, but, I got all the other stuff. And like, here I was, I thought I should be punished. I thought I should be prisoned or killed. And I put myself in a lot of at-risk situations where I probably should be killed. I'm lucky that I survived, short of, taking my own life. And I know there's parents of veterans in the audience, and other veterans who've experienced some of this or have witnessed loved ones go through this. And the way out, honestly, is through service. And it doesn't have to be through Veterans for Peace or, anti-war organizing. If you're a struggling veteran, like, get to a soup kitchen and, help, fix up a neighbor's house, or, you know, something like, there's ways that you can serve and put good back into the world that I think is the pathway. Because when a veteran talks to me, or a family member of a veteran talks to me about their loved ones going through a hard time, that's usually the first thing I ask: are they volunteering anywhere? Because you have to start reinventing your identity around something that's positive and gives you that fills you up. And you know, I could talk longer. There's other things I want to say, but I also want to make sure that I you know, I honor our time here. Ed was able to restrict himself, and I should have the same discipline. So, and I know that y'all might have some questions, and maybe some of this stuff that Ed wanted to say or I wanted to say might come up in some of the Q&A. But Nate, I'll let you guide us through this if you want to try to orchestrate us through some Q&A.
All right. Thanks so much, Garrett and Ed. So what I'm going to do is, if you've got something to say, there's a reactions button at the bottom. Please raise your hand, and we'll do this in an orderly fashion, hopefully. And I'll call on people in order who raise their hand. So, John Shuford, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Thank you, and thank you, Ed. Thank you very much, both of you and Garrett. I am not a veteran. I serve my country in the Peace Corps. But for 30 years, I've been working with correctional staff and also with inmates. And the work that you folks are doing is so important, because corrections and police don't acknowledge it yet. And your groundbreaking work is just incredibly important. 30% of correctional staff and police officers have full-blown PTSD, moral injury, and major depressive disorder. So you guys are doing the work that's going to really make a difference, because I'm carrying this on to the correction staff, et cetera. So I just wanted to thank you very much. It's much bigger than just the veterans, although that is huge in and of itself. So thank you.
Okay.
Can I?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead and respond. Either guys.
So thank you, John. Thank you very much. And a few things. One matter is, as a Peace Corps worker yourself, you're also a warrior for peace. And I want to make sure that we all honor and recognize you that way. So bless you for that. Everybody here is. Your stripes, buddy. And then, yeah, secondly, what you're saying about our police force and corrections officers is absolutely true. PTSD and moral injury are replete in those populations and getting worse with all of our conflicts with racism now. And it varies from force to force, but a very high percentage of all of our first responders are veterans. It's one of the few professions in civilian life that has some continuity with the military. So there are some police forces that are like 60 or 70% veterans. So they're taking their PTSD and moral injury into domestic service, and they still got it and they still haven't healed. So we need to recognize that. And in my work, I have begun in the last, COVID stopped it for a little while, but we can do it this way. The last few years, I have combined healing retreats for veterans and first responders together, recognizing that whether or not they were in service, our first responders are all domestic warriors. It's their job to run into danger to preserve and protect the rest of us while most of the civilians run away. So we can fold them into a larger definition of warriorhood and include them, as you rightly are telling us, John, we must, in these efforts, and realize the depth of wounding that they carry, and that some of their wounding is contributing to the continued rotting of our civilization, because they've got these unhealed wounds and they're heavily armed and in violent situations. So John, your points are very important, and thank you. And this is way bigger than just about veterans, right?
Sam Coleman, go ahead and unmute yourself. We can't hear you, Sam. You're unmuted, but your
Try
microphone
it
doesn't.
now.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me now? Okay, great.
Yes.
Thanks so much. I'm the coordinator of the Vets for Peace Military Trauma Working Group. This is a terrific session. Thanks so much to everybody who's put it together. And I have the hope and the hunch that this is the start of a very productive discussion. I've got what I know is a really difficult question for both of you guys. But do you have a sense in your discussions and your interactions with veterans that there are those whom you almost reached but didn't? And in the course of seeing them just kind of get away, are you developing a sense of what their characteristics are? That's the question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a rough one.
Yeah, I knew it would be. I'm sorry.
I mean, we've lost to so many friends, so obviously you never know how close somebody is, and it's a long journey and it's full of relapses and any additional new harms or guilt or shame that we put upon ourselves trudges up all the old stuff too. I've used to walk, now I walk as carefully as I can to not create as much harm as possible. But when I do cause harm, there's a massive defensiveness to it because I know the dark place that I go to when I wrestle with my shame and my hurt. But that path is different for everybody, and you never really know how close it is. Some folks you think you're out and in the clear, and I assume that a lot of people think I am, and I'm not. We all are still. It's an everlasting journey to fight with and deal with. So there's no real character trait that I can say that anybody has, because it sounds to me like also saying that there's might be like some character flaw, and that's not the case either. It's just we're all dealing with our own situations, our own environments, our own experiences, and how we cope with those. And shit, then there's narcotics, and I think I have a number of friends that I know that, pills have saved their life. They wouldn't be here without them, without the medicine. And I could say that there's friends that I have that have died because of the medicine that they were taking. So like, I can't be against the pills or for the pills. I can't be, it's just really, really a hard question, but it's one that's worth asking.
I'd like to give my take on it as well. Well, first, supporting and reinforcing Garett's wisdom that everybody is on their individual journey, and every one of us brings very different life history elements to our stories. In contrast to that, psychology, psychiatry, and medicine doesn't treat us as individuals, but their systems are basically one size fits all. So Garett's right that we're all on individual journeys, and everybody's should be taken into account, and each person should get individualized support and guidance. But when we just take the group of symptoms and throw a diagnosis and throw medications at it, we're not living our individual journeys, and we don't have guidance and support for doing it. So we need to recognize that, the importance of the individual journey and the necessity for accurate, deep support to walk it wisely and well. The other matter I want to say is that it really is sometimes true that there are other underlying conditions. So many of our veterans come from, maybe all of us do, from challenged, abused, traumatized backgrounds or families or environments. And we do bring earlier life traumas and earlier wounds into veteran and our military experience. So a painful example, sad for me, is that most of the veterans I've taken to Vietnam achieve profound healing while they're there. But a few of them had deep underlying conditions from from really tough childhoods. So I did see, for example, thinking of one Marine sergeant who he went with PTSD and alcoholism and God knows what else. And we did really see his PTSD and moral injury clear up in Vietnam. He went home without that, and people said, what happened to this guy? He came home happy and he's okay now, but he wasn't. His terrible earlier wounds from a very, very rough childhood still took over. So we could watch PTSD symptoms heal and disappear, but not alcoholism and not really, really early psychological wounding that came from earlier in life. So we have to think about that also, that we're also concerned about the wounds of violence and militarism, and we should be. There are other wounds and earlier wounds that are very comprehensive and really profoundly change the psyche so that we can heal some of the military related injuries and people will still be profoundly suffering from other conditions. And those need to be recognized and supported as well.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to call on
Thanks to
myself.
both of you for that.
Yeah, I'm going to call on myself.
Good.
Ed, before the time runs, Ed, I was really struck by, and I've heard this from other people, by what you said about there's no PSD and moral injury in Vietnam. And I'd like you to briefly, contrast there with here and why that is. And I know you said it could be a long discussion, but if you could make it short, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you, Nate. I'll give a preview of coming attractions, and maybe another time we could really have a full discussion on this. But it's a very important topic, and there's one or two people here who have been back to Vietnam with me, so ask them also to testify to this. But very briefly and quickly. All right, Vietnam is a Buddhist culture. Buddhism teaches that life is suffering. I think we all know that the attitudes and values people have when they experience their trauma profoundly affects how they interpret and integrate the traumatic experience. So here, life is supposed to be good and wonderful and beautiful and happy all the time, and something's wrong with us if we're not always happy. In Vietnam, they're Buddhist. Life is suffering, and we expect suffering and pain and struggle. So that's one matter. They don't react to a traumatic event as if it were the monstrous tragedy and as if it were wrong the way we do. Secondly, they believe in karma. And so there's individual and there's collective karma. And they do say if somebody falls in war, that was their karma. It was not one person's fault. It was all of the forces of the universe combining at the same moment. So I've sat with families in Vietnam where all of their children died in the war, and I'm feeling terrible grief and guilt over what our country did. And they're reassuring me, it's okay. We accept that our children served their country and fulfilled their karma. And they've moved on and they're in another place, and it's okay. They're also Confucian. We are an individualistic society. So we've got troubles, they're our problems. It's an individual pathology. You're broken down, you can't handle it. We got to treat you. Vietnam is communal and Confucian. So it's not one person's problem. It's not one person's pathology. It's everybody's. They really don't isolate and separate the way we do. So the injuries don't fall on one person to take care of, but everybody is cared for in the community. I can keep going.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, but and let me affirm that in addition to our veterans traveling there and witnessing this, I have researched this all over the country, including in very remote places where Americans have never been on the ground before until we got there to interview the people. And I've researched it with universities and with the Institute of Psychology in Vietnam. And we all have the same findings. There really isn't PTSD or moral injury here the way it is in America. And there are so many lessons for how to keep a society healthy or restore health after war that I hope we have profoundly more relations with the Vietnamese to bring these lessons here and also work together to share them with the world.
Thank you. Pat Scanlon, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Boom. Hey, Garrett and Ed. Garrett, I really appreciate your sharing, man. And it was that was pretty powerful. And Ed, thank you for your sharing today of your expertise. I have a question specifically on about the VA, but before I go there, I was in Vietnam, to share a little bit. I was at MACV headquarters in Saigon. I was in Targets Division, Military Intelligence. I personally did the bomb damage assessment on B-52 strikes for the year of 1969, which was the highest concentration of strikes in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. So every day I personally did the BDA. So I saw it on and so for 3 years after Vietnam, it was mostly drugs, a little bit of alcohol, but it was mostly drugs. And then I was able to get off of that. Didn't stop my PTSD at all, but it's at least I was able to put it on the shelf. I did a lot of work with Iraqi refugees when they got here in Lowell, Massachusetts, where they put a lot of the Iraqi refugees, families would come in, and the stories that they told me unsolicited, brought back a lot of the of my problems. And so friends of mine were saying, go to the VA, which I did. And different stints and different VAs. And finally, one guy was really good. And he said to me, well, you have moral injury. I said, what? He said, you have PTSD, moral injury. It was the first time anybody put a name to it, which was unbelievable to me. And so that was really helpful. So I have a 30% disability for moral injury, for PTSD. The friends of mine have told me that I should go, I forget how you do it, but the reapply, and for the with the VA. My hesitation is that when I go into the VA, the things that you talk about brings everything back, and I don't want to do that. So I don't want to go back to the VA. But my niece, who is in the Army right now, told me that things have changed at the VA, that they don't have to delve into, what did you do and whatever. And, the famous question of, well, how did that make you feel? That kind of bullshit. And so anyway, so as far as what is the process now at the VA? Is it different? Was it from before? And I don't know if I should do it or not, because my fear is bringing the ghost back. I've got them on the shelf right now, but I don't want to bring them back. But people said, I should go, that 30% isn't enough is what they're saying for me. So what do you guys think?
From what I can tell, especially from moving around the country a bit, that some VAs are better than others. And, some personnel are better than others. Some places have kind of a revolving door of a lot of doctors, and some places have some dedicated doctors that don't mind getting paid a lot less to do their job with a lot of hard work, and they stick around and they're really good. But I think it's going to bring up some stuff, and it's hard to go through, but I think that's the point. It's like bad tasting medicine. Sometimes you gotta, the better medicine tastes awful going down, but it's going to make you feel better in the long run.
Yeah, I'm with Garrett, and I'll build on that a bit. Yes, I think we all have the adage by now that when you've seen one VA hospital, you've seen one VA hospital. They really do significantly vary. So depending where you are, where you live, and which system you're going through will affect your case a lot. But beyond that, I would urge you to find a really good veteran service officer whom you trust, who will do the walk with you. And it doesn't have to be in your region. I've referred people to the best service officers I know around the country to help them through. That's one matter. A second matter is, Pat, damn it, you're right. It's going to trigger the past. And you are going to feel sometimes treated in the present like it was the past. So I really urge you, if you decide to do it, to take this as part of your healing and growth journey. I'm fighting this system that has denied all of us about the true costs of war. And I want to prove it in my case. And, you know, I need, I don't know, a good friend or good counselor to walk through this with, so that when my stuff comes up, I'm working on my healing of it at the same time as I'm in the VA trying to get them to affirm the truth of my case. And so I've done that, yeah, with lots of guys. I'm not saying doing it with me. I'm saying find a battle buddy for this journey who can walk it with you and keep you on your growth trajectory with the challenges that come up.
Okay, JM Vets Care, unmute yourself.
Yes, hi. Well, I do work with the VA quite a bit, and I will say, to get the service connection that you're looking for, Pat, and others, it is a deal with the devil. I want to be honest about that. Even if not all VAs are created equally, they really do have to go through a process to prove your need for service connection based on different factors. So something will come up. The depth of what will come up probably depends on the clinician you get. I work with veterans solely. I only work with veterans who have PTSD diagnoses and service connections. And many of them have gone through several mental health clinicians before they get to one who really works for them. So insist on that. There are some who are really kind of going through the motions and supporting the system more than the veteran. And it is a bureaucratic system, the VA. There's no getting around that. But there are some gifted clinicians who do really well by veterans despite the system that they're part of. It's not because of it. I always say the system serves the system first, and if somebody else gets served inadvertently, that's always a success. But I'm lucky in that I do have a program that is, even though I'm affiliated with the campus in Western Massachusetts, I'm funded separately, and I have some autonomy, and I very much believe in a person-centered approach. I think Garrett and Ed have spoken to that every individual's PTSD is incredibly unique. A lot of people I've worked with have MST as well. If you don't know what that is, it's military sexual trauma. I knew the rates would be high for women, but I've been surprised at how high they are for men as well. And that's just an added loaded layer of PTSD. One of the questions I have, and I think both of you are doing amazing work, so thank you. I'm by your side in this. But I've noticed with medication that a lot of veterans are treated in a crisis with medication, with serious medication that most likely saves their lives. However, what happens, and I used to advocate for older adults in long-term care for many years, so it's the same kind of thing. What happens is the medication becomes central and prolonged, and people are on medications and combinations of medications that perhaps and likely do not serve them in their progress, but did serve them in a crisis. And I think it's a lazy component of the VA. I think medication is way too much of an answer. I also think with the service connection, it's a mixed bag. And I wanted to ask you about that. People I know get a certain amount of income per month that's guaranteed. But in order to make that deal with the VA, they have an identity that they're attached to. And a lot of that identity is PTSD or other mental health factors or substance abuse, substance use disorders. And And so by the time they get to me, and I'm working with people to help integrate them into community-based employment, maybe get them back into education and a combination of that, they are so stuck with that identity, the PTSD. And they're really surprised when I start to talk to them about strengths, and I don't treat them as though they're pathetic and in great need of me to rescue them and that sort of thing. These are adults who deserve dignity and autonomy. And I'm wondering how either of you have fought for that, that need for veterans to get off medication, to get off that kind of track of being a pathetic soul who needs saving. Can either of you speak to that?
Yeah, it's I mean, the identity thing is kind of the crux of the issue, right? I mean, when you know, I think there's a difference between like guilt and shame, right? You could be guilty of something, you did a bad thing, you did something wrong, you accept blame, you're guilty. That's almost just like a fact, right? You know, even if you feel guilty. And then shame is like it's a value that you put upon yourself, right? You're a shameful person, you know, and it's like the VA has a hotline, the suicide hotline, right? And if they created this hotline that said, if you call this number, you could make it sunny again and it will stop raining. And you know that there's no magic number you can call to make it stop raining, right? And make it sunny again. And if you have attributed shame as part of your value, or, you know, whatever it is, you know, the same thing with like fear and cowardice. You know, you could be afraid. It's a natural reaction of something that's dangerous or your loved ones being in danger. Cowardice is you're always going to feel that way because you're a cowardly person, right? Once you attribute identity to yourself and these values, that becomes you really do become stuck, and you have to figure out ways to reinvent yourself. And there has to be positive attributes to that, because a lot of veterans are able to get by and use their disability as an excuse for not doing certain things, right? There has to be a positive something that they could grab onto that's tangible and real, that they could feel that their lives will improve if they abandon that and move towards something more positive and beneficial to them. And if they don't think that you know, that's going to actually manifest, it's going to be really hard. So you have to build trust. And how do you build trust? You need consistency, you know, you need honesty. And, you know, eventually the trust actually happens. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And usually the staff of the VA does not have time. You know, you've got appointments coming in and, you know, your docket's filled up and more people need you. And, you know, so there has to be some way that we can provide each individual veteran somebody to actually be able to build that trust and consistency for them to develop this new identity and want to reach for something powerful, or else it's just not going to happen. And right now we don't fund the VA for enough employees to be able to take that kind of load and develop those things. So, you know, we need to fund the VA. Save Our VA obviously is a big program in Veterans for Peace, or we need to provide that sort of mentorship outside of it that really assists that transition to happen.
And Garrett, I wish it was just a funding issue. It's a culture issue.
Okay.
It's, you know, the VA is a reflection of the chain of command, top-down system. You don't question what is, you fall in line. So, you know, there's a shift to being person-centered or person-directed that would be progress that could be made despite funding. I wish I agree with you that it was a funding issue. I think it's deeper than that, but I don't know if you have anything to say, Ed.
I sure do, and thank you for your comments. I utterly agree with both you and Garrett that healing is fundamentally an identity issue. And well, Marines say once a Marine, always a Marine. It's true for every branch of service. Once a warrior, always a warrior. The way the VA system is organized, the way we have to fight for benefits, the way our warriors are rated with how much civilian functioning do you have? A 50% disability rating means that the VA and our nation judges you to be 50% a civilian and the rest of you is broken. And that's a horribly negative identity that deteriorates us. Instead, I don't think that way at all. I don't use the diagnosis, or I talk about soul distress and social disorder. I talk about warriors throughout history who have had the traumatic wound and thrived with it. And I talk about the ongoing evolution that our warriors have. Everybody who's been in the service has achieved a certain level of warrior wisdom that the general public doesn't have. We're not broken people. We have more to offer, but the society doesn't want it. So I agree with you. Well, Garrett, yes, funding is inadequate, but more than that, most of our psychological training on this issue is wrong. Big statement. We don't understand war wounding and how deep it is to the society and the soul and what makes us essentially who we are. We only have our modern psychological understanding of PTSD, and mostly these days it's reduced to brain chemistry and pharmaceuticals. And that is a tiny bit of a massive problem. Rather, identity transformation to grow into an elder warrior who can serve, as Garrett was saying earlier, do good in some way for the whole life cycle is what we need, and how I work with the warriors. So I'm utterly with you in creating a positive identity to continue to grow into, with meaningful service that we can give, that we are more suited than the public that hasn't been initiated. You're all initiated people, and the general public is avoiding initiation by pushing us and our testimony away. We lose innocence, but we gain wisdom and experience and community. And then we can put ourselves and each other together that way. So I'm with you, and I'm fiercely committed to this transformed perspective.
Thanks, Ed. We have time for a couple more. I know there's like 5 people on the SAC here, but I don't think we'll get to everybody. Doug Rawlings, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I think I'm unmuted now, Nate. Am I?
Yes, you are.
Okay. 5 real quick non sequiturs. First of all, I want to thank Garrett for his courage for being so vulnerable. I mean, in our culture, males are taught not to be vulnerable, certainly not in a public arena. So for Garrett, for you to doing what you're doing and saying what you're saying is incredibly important. Secondly, I think we ought to recognize the great debt we owe Judith Herman, whose work on PTSD really with abused women essentially set the stage for looking at Vietnam veterans returning from that war. Thirdly, I want to say Ed Tick is a hero in my mind, because over 20 years ago, we had Ed Tick and Judith Herman lined up for a symposium on PTSD in Portland, Maine. We had 300 people there in the audience, and Judith Herman called me the day before and she said, "I can't make it." So I asked Ed to do the whole thing, and he did it wonderfully. Another thing, I've done volunteer work at our VA hospital in the psychiatric ward, and I've worked with patients transforming their therapeutic journals into poetry. And my idea was that to take it to distance themselves from it, take this thing that they've got here and craft it into something that's in a sense objective, that's outside of themselves, that they can work with. And my last thing is I've also do volunteer work at this Travis Mills Foundation in Maine, who works with Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans, most of whom are amputees. And the guy who ran it talks about using the term recalibration. He said, we're not wounded, we're not victims, we're trying to recalibrate our lives. And I thought that was an interesting term. So thank you again, everybody. Thanks very much.
Any comments from you two? If not, we'll move on to the next person.
It's great to see you again.
I'll have a beer with Doug and talk about it.
All right. Ayelet, go ahead and unmute yourself. Lower left corner, unmute yourself. There you go.
Thank you so much. I'm a veteran of a different army. I'm a veteran of the Israeli army. And I know, Ed, and I have a question to you, Ed. Like, yesterday I heard actually Dina Metzger talked about the way you explain the measurement of immense. And she said something that I actually never, I don't think, maybe I wasn't ready to hear what you said, but but I really want to understand that. I am, as my means of participation in war, I build bakeries in refugee camps now, but I want to understand the measurement. I understood from you that the measurement for the immense is by something you did to another. And Dina said yesterday that the measurement for the immense is by your soul loss. And I was fascinated by that. Can you talk about that, please?
Sure. Thank you, Ayelet, and it's always wonderful to be with you. Thank you. Well, the simple way to understand and explore that is that when we harm another, we harm ourselves. And referring back to Socrates' teaching, Socrates first awakened civilization to the whole concept of the soul. And he said way back when, at the beginning, what Dina Metzger shared with you yesterday, that when we hurt another, we are harming our own souls. And each time we hurt the other, it's not only about them, but it's about what we're doing to our own inner well-being and our source of morality. So it is true that whenever we cause external pain, we are weakening and hurting our own spiritual core. And to reverse that, like you with the bakeries, when we are doing good in the world, we are also restoring our own core as well. Back to Vietnam for a moment. When our veterans are there apologizing to the Vietnamese, well, when we sit in council with Buddhist priests and nuns, and our veterans are in terrible grief. How can I ever cleanse from this? How can I ever cleanse from this? I did terrible things. The Buddhist monks or nuns will just give them a hug and a big smile and say, oh, you feel like you made bad karma? Well, that's easy. Just make good karma, like you're doing. Every time you send me a picture of a bakery, I know you're making good karma, not just for others, but you're glowing inside from it. And so you are healing the internal cost of the exposure to immoral behavior while we're healing the world. And there's way less, if we're really spiritual, there's way less separation between us and the world than we believe. We are one with each other and one inside. So that's my best answer for you. I think it's right. Thank you. And keep building your bakeries.
Lawrence, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I'm Lawrence Markworth. I'm a U.S. Navy veteran from Vietnam. I've done a lot of work with Ed, Tick. Ed, thank you. And Garrett, I appreciate your kind words today. I have a few things, some of the comments that have come up in questions. One is, I think veterans, we need to remember that there's the VA healthcare and then there's VA benefits. And they don't necessarily have to work or can work in tandem with one another. It was interesting. I went on a return trip to Vietnam with Ed. This was in fall of 2017. It was an amazing healing journey where every veteran we met, ARVN or NVA or Vietcom, they all said, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. We are friends. We're not enemies. We were both fighting for what we thought was the right thing. And there was just so much love and forgiveness. It was very healing. I came home, and 4 weeks later, there was a big fire here in Southern California, Ventura, the Thomas Fire. And like the warrior that I am and always will be, I ran, I obeyed the evacuation announcement. And then I was sitting on a curb at a friend's house, crying over the death of my house. And then a voice spoke to me and said, "What are you doing here? Run, go back, save your house." And that's what I did. And then it was a traumatic evening, surreal evening. It was a PTSD evening. And I started acting really weird afterwards. So I went to my local healthcare, which was Medicare, and I got a diagnosis of PTSD. And then I went to the VA with an amazing service officer from Vietnam Veterans of America, and I got a PTSD rating. And this has all happened in the last 4 or 5 years. So I have a PTSD rating. I have no shame about it. It's like I now have this pension I never thought I would have. I was exposed to Agent Orange and Da Nang. I have heart disease. So I'm rated at 90%, and I lost my job because of the PTSD. So I'm rated at 100% disabled. And I get this beautiful check, tax-free, every month. And I'm proud of what I did. Because of the things I've done with EdTech. And I accepted my destiny as a warrior. I'm an elder warrior. I'm in AA. I'm in a 12-step program. I have sponsees. I had to walk away from this presentation earlier this evening because somebody was calling me, a veteran Navy veteran who's just now, he's 70 years old. He's just now beginning to address some of this stuff like I did 4 or 5 years ago with Ed. So I feel like all this stuff that's given me, I can give back. And it's all, I think most of it's because of the work that Ed has done. And so in order to feel not like I'm a disabled veteran, but I'm helping other vets, is that this whole idea of that, I'm proud of what I've done. And I've learned that all through Ed, because for years and years, I tried to cover it all up through drugs, alcohol, sex, and it didn't work. And once I faced that demon and worked with it and done the work, then I can be proud and I can help other people. And I can have the VA say, you did a good job. Here's what we're going to give you. You risked your life. Here's what we're going to give you. One other thing I want to talk about is what I think Ed had mentioned this briefly, is that we go into the military many times carrying a lot of trauma. And this came to, I had a sponsor in the 12-step program, and I was talking about when I joined the military. I joined it during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And why did I join it? I thought I was serving my country. I thought I was saving the world from communism. No, I wasn't safe at home. So I joined the war. I joined the military during wartime because I wasn't safe at home, because I was being abused at home. So we walk into this with already carrying all this trauma, this unresolved trauma. Then we have wartime trauma, and it's a double whammy. And so consequently, we need to keep working on it. We just keep, I see a therapist. I go to these things. I do my 12-step work. It's a constant battle that you just keep going to, and you just keep doing it. And consequently, now I'm not on any drugs, and I'm doing really well. I'm seeing EMDR therapist through my Medicare provider, Kaiser, and it's really helping. But it never ends. I used to think that through all the therapy that it would all end, It's not going to end. It's always there. You got to keep working on it. And then to help. And I think the biggest thing is helping other people, making restitution. Thank you.
Thanks, Lawrence. Okay, we got two more people and that's going to be it. Paul Cox, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. I've got, and thanks to Ed and to Garrett for their incredible insights. I'm really very appreciative of their openness and their hard work and the work that they've both done for, I'm sorry, Garrett, decades now. So Ed can take it, but you don't hear that often. Right? But I got a few disjointed things. One is I have to take minor exception to Ed's assertion that there's no PTSD in Vietnam. I've made 5 trips there. You don't run into it often, but when you run into it, it's pretty obvious. Mostly I've been working on Agent Orange issues, but also even with the Veterans for Peace trips to Vietnam, I've occasionally run into people. I remember the worst case I ran into was a man who was younger than us. He had been drafted into the North Vietnamese Army and was sent off to the Chinese border in 1979. 400,000 dead in 4 months on that front, where the Chinese attacked Vietnam in order to draw troops away from Cambodia because they were in Cambodia. Anyway, he was telling us about it, and he was just crying. He was just so torn up about his 4 months on the front line. And there have been others. I've been to convalescent homes where severely wounded veterans are spending the rest of their lives. And some of them were shocked to see Americans, just like couldn't deal with it and left, you know. And was there anger there? I don't know, but there was certainly an inability to sort of smile and be nice. So that does exist, and it's not everywhere. It's not broad, and I've been really, my heart has been really touched by the friends I've made who were former enemies, and that's been very healing for me, and hopefully for them too. So I just the blank statement that there's no PTSD in Vietnam is a little much for me. So I'm sorry. The second thing is that Vietnam veterans fought for and won recognition for PTSD. But as JM, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, was saying, it can be a real double-edged sword. What it is, it has resulted in many very messed up veterans being able to live their lives in dignity with an income that they otherwise couldn't have. But it also, it has a danger of locking you into a headset, as you said. That you're a mess and you're just always going to be a mess, and I'm getting $3,600 a month to be a mess, and I'm just going to stay that way. I've known a number of veterans who've gotten big settlements. You know, after 4 or 5 years, they wind up getting all that back pay, and then they get the $3,600 a month. And my advice to them is, don't go buy a new sports car. You know, just don't let that define who you are. Figure out what you're going to do next now that you have financial security. Sometimes that's worked, sometimes it hasn't. There have been plenty of veterans I know that have gotten big settlements that were dead within, not plenty, there have been a couple that have been dead within 6 months because they party down. Now they've got all that money in their pocket. And that's a double-edged sword, it really is. But it is also important that it's helped a lot of veterans live out the rest of their lives with a certain amount of dignity. And that's healing in itself, you know. And the third thing is that, you know, integrating this stuff it's important that we integrate our experiences as young people into our lives. And I think everybody on this call has gotten pretty good at it. You know, I mean, Garrett, his moral injury is, you know, has led him to be where he is now. My moral injury has led me to be where I am now. And I don't remember who it was earlier said that they hadn't ever heard the term until about 10, 15 years ago. And that was exactly the same for me. It was like, that's it. I've got some PTSD, but by God, I got a lot of moral injury, and integrating that and making that who we, and so we're all here tonight because we either have moral injury or we certainly recognize it. So thank you all for what you're doing to heal. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I want to briefly respond to your response to me. So thank you, Paul. I do apologize. If in case you can't tell, I'm an enthusiastic person, and I sometimes tend to make large general statements when I'm really excited about what I'm saying. So Paul's sharing about Vietnam is important in several ways. There is really accurately very little long-term chronic wartime PTSD among the Vietnamese veterans of the American War. There are some people in hospitals and homes who are very disturbed from it, but mostly it's not there. And Paul's also correct that there is significant PTSD from the two 1979 wars. Remember, Vietnamese went into Cambodia to stop the Khmer Rouge genocide. And as Paul said, the Chinese border war, they attacked from the north. And it was brutal. And I actually helped veterans of the border war found a veteran organization in Hanoi for them, because they report that while their American war veterans are respected and honored around the country, their Chinese border war veterans are not, and they're not recognized by the government, and they're not given adequate support because of the politics there that Vietnam, they say, is still so insecure with China that they are suppressing the memory of the 1979 war to not piss off the Chinese. So the American war veterans are recognized and supported. The Chinese border war veterans are not, and that causes PTSD, which also demonstrates what we've suffered, that when your own country is in denial about your service, your war experiences, and won't recognize you as one of their warriors, then that is going to lead to PTSD and moral injury. And so the 79 veterans of the Chinese border war really do have that in Vietnam, and feel great solidarity with American veterans because their experiences are more similar. So thank you, Paul, for making sure we do it accurately together.
Okay, and Lola, go ahead and unmute yourself. This is the last person.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you all so much for this incredibly profound experience. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. And thank you, Lawrence. Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody who has shared from such a vulnerable place. I'm an associate member of the Joan Duffy chapter in Santa Fe. I am in Veterans for Peace because I understand the warrior wisdom. And I want to help get that into the whole culture, because I would like to see war stop. And I don't think it is unless this initiation, as it got spoken about, happens. And I just want to thank everyone for doing the inner work. It is not easy. It's painful. I've gone through enough trauma that I really know that. My father was a refugee from the Nazis, very much had post-traumatic stress, believed in pulling the curtain on your pain, became an alcoholic, died from his alcoholism. And so I just want to encourage everyone, as has been said by others, to keep doing the work and find safe people and loving people who you can work with. And it can clear. It can clear. And it just makes a whole big difference to be able to clear whatever the trauma is, and to forgive oneself, and to do the positive works that people are talking about. And I just feel so grateful, and I feel such gratitude for everyone here, everyone. And I thank you for this. And I said, oh, one more thing. Garrett, I don't remember the name of this film that was shown at the end of the conference, the VFP conference, but it was from a veteran who made the film. It was about the drug addiction that happens with veterans who are just kind of like given, oh, take this, take that, and went through, I don't know, 39 years of drug addiction. I don't remember. I can't remember all of the thing, but I would like to know if we can have the name of that film and that people would be encouraged to look at it. It's really important.
Becky
It's
put
really
it in the
important.
chat. It's called Medicating Normal.
Thank you, Garrett. That was a profound offering from the conference. Absolutely profound. Many down the line things, because I know so many people who are just simply on antidepressants or anti-anxieties medications, and it's not serving them. So thank you. Bless you, everyone, and hugs. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Thanks, Lola. All right, I want to thank Garrett and Ed. This was a fantastic, experience here. And do you guys have any last words of wisdom? And before you do, I do want to also echo what Doug Rawlings said, thanking Garrett for showing his vulnerability and in discussing his own experiences. So do you guys have any last words that you'd like to leave us with, Ed and Garrett?
Thank you.
Well-
Bless you. I love you all.
Good enough.
I just, it's a strange, in sniper school, we go through, it must be like a 2 or 3 day course. It's like the very few times that you're actually in a classroom getting instruction, and it talks about the anatomy of a kill, and you look at, shots in like pig carcasses and gel blocks and all sorts of things. You learn about how a round tumbles and how you deploy the round. I don't know if y'all realize, but most an M16 or an M4 uses a 5.56 round, which is smaller than what an AK-47 uses. And I remember in the class, somebody raised their hand. They were very excited that we use 7.62 rounds in sniper rifles because it's a heavier round, right? It has more penetrating power. It's a larger round, which means you could get better range with the round. But the instructor said something interesting. He said, the heavier round, it deploys a lot later. And what they meant by deploying is a round tumbles. When it enters something and makes contact, the round begins to flip. And the reason why we use 5.56 rounds in like a M16 is because the lighter round tumbles faster because it hits something and it begins to spin. And because our enemies typically aren't armored, the rounds enter the flesh, they tumble, and you could shoot somebody in the belly and it'll come out their shoulder, right? If the round tumbles enough. So they actually teach us in sniper school to shoot through car doors or shoot through helmets that'll deploy the round earlier, and likely instead of just pass through somebody cleanly, it'll deploy and twist and just cause blood and guts. And it stuck with me for the longest time, and at some point in Iraq, doing sniper mission after sniper mission, I realized that I was no longer the sniper, right? I wasn't the one pulling the trigger. I was that bullet. And my democracy aimed me and my government pulled the trigger, and out I went, and I tumbled through guts and brains and hearts. And, I did the awfulest things. And to the chagrin of my government and corporations, I got back up and I came home covered in the mess that I had made. Right. And, at Veterans for Peace, we are walking bullets, right? We are living examples of truth to power that can talk about our experience and share with people the horrors of war. That's the power of our organization, is we're military veterans and allies that can speak the truth, right? The only better person to express the truth of war are the communities that we've devastated, right? And because of veteran privilege and because of patriotic nationalism, we've been given credibility by our society to put us in a position where we could be the better storyteller to our comrades in the United States. And we have to use that power, right? Like Veterans for Peace is more than just a cool social club and a fun like hobby of mine. It is saving my life. It is saving other people's lives, and it's potentially saving lives of people we will never even met and never knew we existed. And we have to keep up this work, and we've got to, we can save the world, and that's the power that we have. And that's what's given to us by society. So thanks for working hard. Thanks for staying up late for these hard meetings. I'm sure Nate has a very big agenda still for you. So I appreciate you sticking with us, and I'm always accessible to you all. So come find me at the holiday meeting this weekend on Friday or any other time, and I'm happy to talk about this stuff.
All right. Thank you.